So we're going to go through talking about what the Masters of Wisdom is today, the hierarchy of enlightened being, as they're also called. But before we go into that, we'll, without further ado, go into the meditation, which will be the start of every class, and we'll practice the first half of it for about 6 months, and then the second half for the following 6 months of the course. I will be making a couple of tweaks of classes to the course. For instance, next week, instead of karma and reincarnation, before that we're going to slip in the subject of Shambhala, which I will touch on today several times, but there's a whole really amazing presentation to share with you on Shambhala next week. So that will be the class next week. And from time to time we may do this. We may reduce, say, 3 classes on one subject to just 2 and slip in another one that might be more appropriate. We go to the group meditation for awakening the heart and invoking the spiritual will, taken from the Discipleship of the New Age book, as discussed last week, and also as most of you should have received in your email when you registered for this course, had a chance to read it. So I don't have all the details about it here, but I have on my screen, which you're welcome to follow, or you can just close your eyes. Just a short couple of pages of focusing, visualizing, and so forth. So if we just let go all the activity of the day, and we will sound the Om softly 3 times to bring about individual and group alignment, visualizing the light of the higher self blending with the lesser light of your integrated personality. So we'll go ahead and sound the 3 Oms. And so we enter into a reflective alignment of soul and personality using the creative imagination. And this is a feeling or astral activity. We visualize the soul merging with the lesser light of the personality so that the two become one. And we assume a relation of solar plexus center, heart center, and head center, with the focus of the assuming consciousness placed in the region of the ajna or brow chakra. And this is done mentally. Triangle of solar plexus, heart, and head, focused through the brow chakra. When this has been achieved and realized, it follows next the concentration of aspiration and of thought in the heart center imagining it to be just between the shoulder blades. It must be recognized that the concentration of thought energy is definitely there. Concentration of aspiration and of thought in the heart center. Then follows the conscious and pictorial or imaginative withdrawal of the heart's aspiration, life and devotion into the center above the head, the thousand-petaled lotus or crown chakra, and its conscious focusing there. Withdrawal of the heart's aspiration, life and devotion into the crown chakra. When this stage has been reached and the conscious recognition of place and activity is being gently yet surely held, we sound the sacred word Om very softly 3 times, breathing it out toward soul. Om. The hierarchy. And humanity. These 3 factors now constitute a definite and linked triangle of force: the soul, the hierarchy, and humanity. And to affirm this, we now say with heartfelt intent, the mantra of unification. The sons of men are one, and I am one with them. I seek to love, not hate. I seek to serve and not exact due service. I seek to heal, not hurt. Let pain bring due reward of light and love. Let the soul control the outer form in life and all events, and bring to light the love which underlies the happenings of the time. Let vision come and insight. Let the future stand revealed. Let inner union demonstrate, and outer cleavages be gone. Let love prevail. Let all men love. Well, a wonderful subject. As I show on this first slide here, The Masters of the Seven Rays was one of the first books that I wrote. When I started writing it, however, I realized that I had to write the Shambhala impacts first, which we'll be looking at next week, and then finish off this one, which resulted in both of them coming out at the same time, right on the so-called fifth Shambhala impact at the Wesak Festival in 2000. A very happy coincidence. So it's called The Masters of the Seven Rays, Their Past Lives and Reappearance. And of course, the Masters are perfected beings who have gone through all the phases of human development over millennia, many lifetimes in different cultures and different genders, and have reached a point of liberation where they essentially don't have to come back anymore. And so the hierarchy of enlightened being, or the elder brothers, the so-called Great White Brotherhood, are the ones who have liberated themselves from Earth life but have chosen to stay behind and choose the so-called first cosmic path of the 7 cosmic paths, called the path of Earth's service, and watch over and guide humanity on their journey to liberation and perfection. So we are all masters in the making, as I've written here. We will all eventually perfect ourselves and move through the various phases of initiation, the science of initiation being, of course, a sub-science of esoteric astrology, which I mention frequently in my newsletters and books. And it's very interesting, you know, this material, most of the material I base my courses and writings on is from Alice Bailey's 24 books that were transmitted to her by the Master DK. And he makes this very humble statement at the beginning of all the books. He says, "I am a brother of yours who has travelled a little longer upon the path than has the average student and has therefore incurred greater responsibilities. I am one who has wrestled and fought his way into a greater measure of light and has the aspirant who will read this article, and I must therefore act as a transmitter of the light, no matter what the cost." So the refinement and awareness required for self-mastery naturally draws the candidate for initiation, the spiritual student, into the inclusive structure of an esoteric group within the framework of the spiritual hierarchy. And as the student proceeds through the various stages of self-mastery, through the various formal initiations sanctioned by the hierarchy, the candidate, the aspirant, the disciple or initiate, becomes more and more aware of the structure and inclusiveness of the hierarchy and the evolutionary plan. And so we are going through a very unique period in the planet at the moment. In the last century, millions and millions of humanity have woken up and have reversed the wheel, so-called, and taken the first initiation, have had that first glimmering of soul, or what we call Christ consciousness, that has motivated them to tread the spiritual path consciously. And then, of course, we have the second initiation, the third initiation, the fourth initiation, and finally the fifth initiation, where one becomes a master of wisdom. So, and of course, this process is heightened by the fact that the hierarchy, the masters of wisdom, are about to return for the first time in a very, very long time, possibly in our lifetimes, in the next few decades. And as I've mentioned many times before, their centennial conclave in 2025, just a couple of years away, they will determine and pick a date for their reappearance, and for which I speculate will be maybe a few decades, as certain personnel from all the various ashrams which the masters preside over have to be in place to pave the way for not only the externalization of all the ashrams onto the physical plane and the masters walking amongst humanity again, but the reappearance of the one we call the Christ himself. So here are 2 very important diagrams. We will attach this in an email back out to you after this meeting. And one on the left is the standard one from the book Initiation, Human and Solar. That's the first book that Alice Bailey wrote, and which I recommend, if you have not read any of the books yet, as the first one for yourself to read. The one on the right is a colored version of that. It's not very clear actually, so I'm going to stick to the one on the left. Solar and planetary hierarchy. So take a deep breath, because we're going to go a little bit cosmic first into the big picture view of things, and then we're going to come back down to earth, so to speak. So essentially, what you have up here is the solar logos. In other words, the being who inhabits the energy system we call the sun and the solar system. And of course, we are a planet, one of the many planets in the solar system. But this structure here outside of this big circle is more to do with solar consciousness, if you like. Within this circle is more to do with planetary consciousness. In other words, it says here, planetary hierarchy of the Earth scheme. So what we have at the top here is the solar logos, and we have this trinity below the solar logos. And this series of trinities and quadruplicities, there's a fourfold, we have the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh rays that pour through the gateway of the sun and are distributed and come into the Earth sphere here through this circle called S, which is S for Shambhala, or Sanat Kumara, who resides at Shambhala. And that being has the so-called three Buddhas of activity surrounding him. In fact, there's actually 7 altogether, which constitutes the 7 spirits before the throne that you may have read about in the Bible and other esoteric texts. But that's something that you may want to come back to and investigate somewhere down the track. But essentially what we have here is a descending hierarchy of energy flow pouring into the solar system through the sun, and the distribution of the 7 rays. We'll get into the 7 rays in a couple of more classes, and we'll do that for 3 weeks, exploring all the ins and outs of the rays. But suffice to say, these rays pour through into the solar system and through these planetary hierarchies within this Earth scheme circle. And so what we have are these 3 circles here, A, B, and C, which constitute the major offices, and not without the OFFICES, offices that work in concert with Shambhala or Sanat Kumara and preside over the Masters of Wisdom. So we have the office of the Manu, we have the office of the Christ, we have the office of the Mahachohan. You can see it over here clearly in the coloured circles, Manu, Christ, Mahachohan, the Lord of Civilization. And below this you can see these numbers here, 1, 2, and 3 in the solar part. We have the correspondence of these numbers going down these 3 vertical lines. It's a little bit like a Kabbalistic tree in some ways. And we're talking about the energy of the first ray line, for instance, the first ray of will or power, the second ray line of love, wisdom, the third ray line of active intelligence. And so we have other masters upon this line that we'll try and cover in this class. We have other masters on the second ray line that we'll try and cover as well. And we have this 4, 5, 6, and 7. These are the 4 rays of attribute. We have the 3 main rays of aspect and the 4 main rays of attribute. And there's a master for 4, 5, 6, and 7. And all in all, these 7 rays have 7 custodians, or shohans as they're called, of the rays. And these constitute the 7 main ashrams within the planetary structure. And those 7 ashrams have 7 sub-ashrams, making 7 times 7 or 49 groupings of rays and sub-rays to which we all as individuals gravitate depending upon our soul ray, depending on our our karma and our evolution over many lives. We'll get more into this in a minute. So I realize there's a lot to take in here, and bear in mind that if you that you'll have plenty of time to go over these videos in retrospect during the week and pick up what you may have missed out on. Okay, so you can see here we have the Manu, Master Jupiter, and Master Moya. We have the Christ in the center wheel here. I think that one there is the European Master, the Master Kutumi, the Master DK. They're all on the second ray line. And I think this green one over here is going to be the Venetian Master, who we'll explore later as well. So this is a diagram that you'll always come back to, and you'll be able to sort of fill in the gaps for yourself in terms of your evolving understanding. It's as necessary a diagram as the one we sent out last week, the Southern Planes of Perception. And you'll note the many lines of relationship that exist between all these rays and subrays as well. This is these are energy streams and their very complex relationship to one another. Maybe I have to see it a little bit easier over here in the colored section. So Sanakamara, the Lord of the world, in a sense, the personality expression of the one we call the planetary logos. As we have a solar logos, the being whose body is this entire solar system. So we have a planetary logos. And Sanakamara is regarded as the personality expression of that being, and is incarnate, but not in a physical body, only as far as the etheric level. In a physical location, however, which is the Gobi Desert in Tibet. And we'll explore that more in the next class from Shambhala. So what we have here is some really profound patterns that we're all familiar with, the spiral of life. And we're talking about the 7-ray ashrams here that I touched upon before. And the role of the master is to encourage the evolution of consciousness and to cooperate with the evolutionary plan according to the charter of the master's esoteric group, and therefore according to the master's qualification and abilities. In other words, if a master was on the 5th ray, for instance, he'd be at the center of one of these vortices of force. This is a good way of depicting an ashram as a spiral or indeed concentric rings. The master who was the seed for the ashram. And not all the ashrams have come into full expression yet. Only half of them, of the so-called 49 ashrams, are fully manifested as yet. I think the rest will manifest in the next couple of 1,000 years as we go through the Aquarian age. So let's just take this center diagram, for instance. And of course, we have the galaxies which emulate the same life pattern. But the master is at the center and it is, for instance, a 5th ray soul. Other souls on the 5th ray who are aspirants, disciples, or initiates hold various places within these spiral arms of this pattern. And all 5th ray souls will gravitate to one of the 5th ray ashrams, depending on the sub-ray of the ashram and their specific work within the greater planetary plan. And through their own trials and tests of initiation, will go through these various ring pass knots, as we call them, or magnetic fields that exclude any further progress towards the center until the testings of that initiation have been proved. And the closer, and so you can imagine there are thousands of people awakening and gravitating to the center of one ashram or the other of the 7 ray ashrams. And as they go, they become more and more aware of their role in helping to execute part of the planetary plan. The planetary plan is made known by Sanat Kumara through the various ashrams, and the Masters of Wisdom are the ones who execute those plans and bring spirit into matter, essentially. So we are all at various stages of progressing towards the center of one of these ashrams, and eventually we ourselves might become the master of that ashram. It might be in hundreds of lives or dozens of lives or just a few lives, depending on where you're at in your unfoldment of consciousness and what initiations you may have taken. We will have a separate class of initiation, or classes, I think, somewhere on this course. So we'll clarify more about that. So there are 49 ashrams reflecting the 7 times 7 ray groupings. Not all are manifested. There are 63 masters on the planet, and they wield great power, having the ability to direct many intelligences in the Deva evolution as well on behalf of humanity. That's why the Deva evolution is another subject, part of this course, because, and something that in the Aquarian age we're going to learn to work with far more consciously. We have had this ability in the past, but we've lost it, and we will be regaining that ability in the future. The angelic kingdom, the angelic evolution or Deva evolution. Of course, there are many, many different grades of these angelic beings, from the very minor to the very major. And all the masters, without exception, work with these beings at some level or another, as we'll discuss further on in the class. So the flower of life pattern is another good way to look at the ashrams. In a sense, the 7 times 7, 49 ashrams constitute what is called the ashram of the Christ, because the Christ, or the one who holds the post or the office of the Christ, is the master of all masters and presides over all the ashrams. So evolved is his consciousness. And there's another story too about the Christ, of course, being part of earth chain humanity as opposed to the moon chain humanity, which is where the Buddha came from. But that's a whole other class beside. We can't go into that today too much, but just to touch on that. So the greater ashram of the Christ is containing all the lesser ashrams. Was there a comment? Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. Is it okay? There's 2 questions in the chat.
Yes.
Would
yes.
you
Stop for chat.
now? Yes. Okay.
Yes.
So the first is from Karen and friends, and they are asking, do masters through their ashrams work together?
Absolutely. Yes, of course. There's many different corresponding combinations of masters who work together. In Alice Bailey's book, The Rays and the Initiation, she goes into that in quite some detail, and also the book Externalization of the Hierarchy, plus the one I already mentioned, Initiation Human Solar. Masters, initiates, disciples, and aspirants. There are 2 divisions of the Great White Lodge, or the lodges, within the greater body of the hierarchy. There is the so-called ... lodge, we don't know what it's called, comprised of initiates above the 5th initiation and a group of devas or angels. So we're talking about masters upwards. The so-called Chohans or Koans that I mentioned before, the custodians of the rays, they have to be at least the 6th initiation, which is so far beyond our understanding. It's impossible to really describe that level of consciousness. And then we have the Blue Lodge, comprised of all initiates of the 3rd, 4th, and 5th initiations. Then below this, we have a large group of initiates of the first and second initiations, and then the disciples of every grade. Disciple being that word that comes from the word discipline, as in the discipline of the lower self that helps you get through the various initiations. The disciples are considered as affiliated with the lodge, but not as literally members of it. And finally come those who are on probation, who hope through strenuous effort to achieve affiliation. In fact, it's broken down in the other of Alice Bailey's books into another 6 stages of probation, of aspiration, probation, and discipleship, where one is the aspiring chela, or CHELA, the chela on the thread, and so forth, all these different technical occult terms for that individual advancing to the center of the ashram. And so going through the various magnetic fields that protect the ashram, and passing the appropriate test to go from one minor initiation, there are minor initiations as well as major initiations, you see, to cooperate with the center portion of the ashram where the master holds the plan. So, giving you very, very broad brushstrokes here, everyone, as far as these are many umbrellas I'm kind of sprouting here, but there are many things underneath each umbrella that we could go into, and much of which will be filled out within this course as well. These are the larger structures. So we have these diagrams again, and go into, I'm going to read to you this page here. This is a quote from Initiation Human and Solar. The workers, or adepts, as they're also called, the masters are called adepts, concerned with the evolution of the human family comprise 63, if the 3 great lords are counted in making the 9 times 7 necessary for the work. Of these, 49 work as exoterically, if it might be so expressed, and 14 esoterically, being more concerned with the subjective manifestation. This is something important to remember, because occultism, esotericism, is the science of subjective manifestation, of that which cannot be seen with the normal senses, of that which must be intuited, and that which must be assisted through the meditation process. Not many of their names are known to the public, nor would it be wise in many cases to reveal who they are, where they dwell, and what is their particular sphere of activity. A very small minority, through the group karma and a willingness thus to sacrifice themselves, have come before the public eye during the past 100 years, and therefore concerning these, certain information may be given out. Of course, he's talking about the Master Moya and Master Kutumi in particular, who were working closely with Helena Blavatsky and started the Theosophical Society. They wanted it to be known that the hierarchy of enlightened being, the masters of wisdom, actually exist and actually are supervising humanity's evolution, giving them as much free will as possible. Of course, during that time of the Theosophical movement, other names came to light, such as the Master Hilarion, the Master Serapis, the Master DK. So quite a number of people in the world today are aware of their existence independently of any particular school of thought, and the realization that those whom they thus know personally are workers in a great and unified scheme of endeavor may encourage these real knowers to testify to their knowledge and thus establish past all controversy the reality of their work. Certain schools of occultism and of theosophical endeavor have claimed to be the sole repository of their teaching and the sole outlet for their efforts, thereby limiting that which they do and formulating premises which time and circumstance will fail to substantiate. They work most assuredly through such groups of thinkers and throw much of their force into the work of such organizations, yet nevertheless they have their disciples and their followers everywhere and work through many bodies and many aspects of teaching. Throughout the world, disciples of these masters have come into incarnation at this time with the sole intent of participating in the activities and occupations and truth dissemination of the various churches, sciences and philosophies, and thus producing within the organization itself an expansion, a widening and a disintegration where necessary, which might otherwise be impossible. All right, so the seven spirits before the throne someone wants to know about. It's a deeply esoteric subject. I really cannot go into it today, but there are three more invisible Buddhas of activity and three visible Buddhas of activity. These beings, including Sanat Kumara, are the ones who stayed behind after this vast visitation of so-called Kumaras came from the Venus globe of the Earth chain. Now, you may not know what the hell I'm talking about when I say that, but I'm being technically accurate. This is when the spark of mind was ignited in humanity 21 odd million years ago. And all the other Kumaras have since gone back from whence they came, and the seven spirits before the throne, which includes Sanat Kumara, have stayed behind. And as the famous saying goes, Sanat Kumara will remain at his post until the last weary pilgrim comes home. I really don't have time to go into any more of that then, I'm sorry. We've got a lot of material to get through today, and we may not get through it all, but I also don't want to rush either.
Yes, Philip, there's some two people asking here about the ashram. What's the definition? I don't know if you can, in a short, this.
Well, the ashram, you know, in India,
ashram?
India, for instance, people go to the Gandhi ashram or the Theosophical ashram, and for 6 weeks, and they put on their white robes and they swan around and be all spiritual and meditate and so forth. And I'm just saying this from a humorous point of view. And this is like an outer ashram, a grouping of people following a particular spiritual philosophy, and whether it's the Hindu or Buddhist or whatever. But the true ashrams are what we are all affiliated with on the inner planes, according to our soul ray. And that's the ashram that we all contact at some point along the spiritual path. And it may be through an outer ashram activity or not. It might be in the world of business, of science, of religion. That's the short answer to that question. Thanks. So let's talk about Shambhala briefly, bearing in mind I'm going to go into it in much more detail next week. Sanat Kumara, the Lord of Shambhala, the Lord of the world, the Ancient of Days, the Silent Watcher, Melchizedek, the One Initiator. Sanat Kumara, the personality expression of the planetary logos, from the second globe of the Venus chain, as I just alluded to, within the Earth scheme. And we'll talk about that more in later classes. Sanat Kumara is anchored in etheric substance at Shambhala. And the Buddhist color chakra initiation that many of you are familiar with is related to Shambhala. It's a teaching that comes from Shambhala, in fact. In the West, Shangri-La is derived from Shambhala and was featured in the book by James Hilton called Lost Horizon, this idyllic paradise of spiritual paradise that exists on Earth. Ibez was the name of the first Shambhala in South America, much later in Mayan civilizations. And of course, there'll be a class next week on the 3 Shambhalas. We have here a painting by the Russian artist Nicholas Rurik of Rigden Japo is the name of this being here, another name for Sanat Kumara, in fact, who is receiving messengers here on horseback and dispatching messengers. It's a great sort of metaphor in many ways for the work of Sanat as Lord of the world, and the distribution as it is precipitating and being tweaked continually of the planetary plan. So beautiful picture that. So it's one of my favorites of Rurik's. And here is just one of many paintings that you've probably seen of the idyllic Shambhala hidden away somewhere in the Himalayas. Technically, it is beyond the Himalayas, as I said before, anchored in etheric substance somewhere in the Gobi Desert. And yet, yes, there are many artistic renderings of this paradise, if you like, and most of them probably inaccurate. But there are also descriptions of individuals who have visited Shambhala at a full moon meditation or in their dreams. Alice Bailey gives a description of her experience, in fact, in her autobiography, which is very interesting. Now, someone here is asking, are these structures repeated or reflected in other belief systems, Freemasonry, Egyptian pantheon, equivalent deities? The terminology like lodge, for example, seems to indicate in part of this may be the case. Yes, that's true. Freemasonry, not the abused and distorted Freemasonry, but the true Freemasonry is based, in fact, on the White Lodge, on the Great White Lodge, and the influence of Sirius and so forth. And these traditions are also found, or equivalents are found in the Egyptian tradition, and many of the Greek and northern Scandinavian mythologies. Now, these have been the three locations of the Shambhalas. The original one here, somewhere in this region of Bolivia, Brazil, back in Lemurian times. The next one was much later in the Mayan institutions around Guatemala area. And the current one is in this area of Mongolia, Tibet, China, in the Gobi Desert. They are all active, but this is the most active one at the moment. But in the 6 root race that we're going into, as I discuss in various essays and videos, the focus will go back to the original Shambhala. We'll go full circle. So the center where the will of God is known is another way to describe Shambhala, and very powerful energy emanations that pour forth from there. So before in the diagram we discussed the 3 departments: the Manu, the Christ, and the Mahachohan. We're going to examine those now in a bit more detail, starting with the Manu. And this is just an artistic rendering by someone. He might look like that, he may not. Many of these beings are in physical bodies or preparing physical bodies for their re-emergence into the world. The Manu is on the Ray 1, or will or power. He influences government, statesmen, and politics. He oversees the founding, guiding, and dissolution of racial forms, or root races, a subject that I discuss in great detail in my Hidden History of Humanity work. He's held the office for about 100,000 years, which is the period of the 5th subrace of this 5th root race. Other offices by these other department heads are held at shorter or longer periods. He knows the immediate purpose of Sanat Kumara and is incarnate in physical form, apparently living near Shigatse in Tibet. Now, Shigatse is the name of the town there, but it's going to be somewhere near there in the area, and even if you want to try and find it, it would be protected by magnetic barriers, as people have found out who have tried to go there. The work of the Manu is largely concerned with government, with planetary politics, and with the founding, direction, and dissolution of racial types and forms. To him is committed the will and purpose of the planetary logos. He knows what the immediate objective for this cycle of evolution over which he has to preside, and his work concerns itself with making that will an accomplished fact. He works in closer cooperation with the building devas than does his brother the Christ, for to him is given the work of setting the race type, of segregating the groups out of which races will develop, and of manipulating the forces which move the Earth's crust, of raising and lowering continents, of directing the minds of statesmen everywhere, so that racial government will proceed as desired and conditions be brought about which will produce those needed for the fostering of any particular type. Such a work can now be seen demonstrated in North America and Australia. This was written 100 years ago, of course, so it would include other countries. But this gives you an idea of the tremendous power and, of course, in fact, you know, the earthquakes working with the gaseous devas underground, in fact, according to karmic law and so forth, this being is responsible for those, what we call disasters. Something to ponder on. The Manu is called Vivasvata Manu. It's the Manu of the fifth root race. He sets the type for our Aryan race. Aryan, a word, an Indian word meaning noble race, which has been, of course, distorted by the Nazi tradition. Having presided over its destiny since its inception nearly 100,000 years ago. I said that before, I'm sorry. Other Manus have come and gone, and his place will be in the relatively near future taken by someone else, and that will be Master Moya, in fact, on the first ray line, who will be the next Manu, just as the Master Kuthumi will be the next, who will take the office of the Christ. And both of them will work together very closely, as they have done for millennia, as we go into the Aquarian age. There's another Manu who's specifically for the fourth root race, or the Asian races. His center of influence is in China. The Vivasvata Manu has his dwelling place in the Himalayas near Shagats, which of course is the area where the Master Kuthumi, the Master Moya, and the Master DK also reside permanently in physical bodies. The plans are prepared for ages ahead. Centers of energy are formed thousands of years before they will be required. And in the wise foreknowledge of these divine men, nothing is left to a sudden eventuation, but all moves in ordered cycles under rule and law, though within karmic limitations. Of course, this book here is one of many books that you can find in the Hindu tradition called the Laws of Manu. It's like, in a sense, the original 10 Commandments, but more so. The Devas are part of the what's called in the West the angelic kingdom. So we have the very lesser Devas like the fairies and gnomes and elves and so forth, who are the builders of the form. Then we have the higher, more individualized angels that are the healing angels, and responsible for many other areas of human activity, in fact. Then we have, of course, the well-known archangels, but it's a very big subject, and I can only give you a short answer now. So we come to the second post, the Christ himself, Maitreya, or the world teacher, as he is also known. The second ray of love wisdom pours through him, the ray of this particular solar system, in fact. When we look at the rays in more detail, we'll find that the second ray is the predominant ray, and that all the other rays are essentially sub-rays of the second ray of love wisdom. He's held this office since 600 BC, and the Buddha held the previous post. He is the master of masters, the instructors of angels and humanity. He is said to, in fact, when he returns, he will be returning with a vast army of angels. He guides spiritual destinies of humanity. He energizes the consciousness within all forms. He works closely with the Manu and the Mahachohan as a trinity, as those three various circles represent. The Mahachohan, the Lord of civilization. He stimulates all those who aspire and seek the truth. He is the initiator of the sacred mysteries, and he presides over the first two initiations. From the third initiation onwards, it is Sanat Kumara who presides over those initiations. In my book, the Initiations of Krishnamurti, I go through all the initiations in more detail, if you care to look at that. Imminent return after 2025, the externalization of the hierarchy, of course. The Christ must also be discovered in the heart, but a physical return will also occur. The Christ overshadowed his disciple Jesus for the last 3 years of Jesus' ministry, up until the crucifixion. When Jesus was going through the fourth initiation experience, crucified upon the cross, Christ was taking the sixth degree initiation, or the seventh degree initiation actually, but that's another in-depth story. He was to overshadow Krishnamurti, in fact, last century, but that was only partially successful, that plan, due to many factors which I describe in my book about that. His previous incarnation was as Krishna many, many eons ago. This, of course, photograph is one of many idealized pictures of the Christ. We have other ones by Nicholas Roerich, cover of my book here, Jesus in the Mountains, where he takes the third degree initiation, or the transfiguration, where he's tempted by the devil to go the way of matter or materialism. This other one by Nicholas Roerich here is depicts him praying before, I think it's before his favorite pine tree, somewhere in Central Asia, we're told. Not in Shigats as such. The other pictures here, all of you are familiar with in the Western Christian tradition, or of the Christ, and the various of painters, of course, particularly the Italian painters down the ages. So, of course, we could write a book about this being, perhaps, and many books have been written about him. And we move on to the third department, the Mahachohan, currently held by the Master R, the Lord of Civilization, as he's known. This concerns the third ray of active intelligence, the Mother Ray. The Mahachohan holds the office for several root races for like hundreds of thousands or even millions of years. And the Mahachohan, or Master R, assumed this office in 1925, in fact, when the whole hierarchy shifted up one level from the polarization upon the mental plane to their current polarization on the Buddhic or intuitive plane. The Mahachohan fosters the relation between spirit and matter, life and form, which results in civilization. He manipulates the forces of nature, Pan, the mother aspect, and works with the Manu in terms of the shifting of continents and so forth. He's responsible for electrical energy as we know it, electric, solar, electric force, solar force, or electric fire, solar fire, and fire by friction, as it's called esoterically. He makes the Manu and the world teacher's plans possible. The mother gives birth or manifests. He works with large numbers of Deva agents, the mother of forms. He works with the Manu and racial government, with the Christ and religion, and of course his own department, civilization. All of these three beings are in contact with Sanat Kumara in terms of manifesting the planetary plan. His name, Master R, comes from Master Rakotsi, when he took the fifth initiation as a Hungarian noble back in the 18th century. And he was the master of the 7th ray ashram at that time, and a ray which is closely associated with the 3rd ray of active intelligence, which is the Mahachohan's department now. And so he morphed into another personality that we know as the Count Saint-Germain, and was famous all over Europe. He lives apparently in the Carpathian Mountains, just north of Hungary. He oversees the mental outgrowth in USA and Australia and other countries. Some of his past lives were as Roger and Francis Bacon. As Francis Bacon, he took the 4th degree at the court of Elizabeth I in Britain. Count Saint-Germain was his last incarnation in Europe. He's a small, spare man with a pointed black beard, as per this picture here. And this is an English artist rendering of what she believes, or she was impressed, in fact, psychically, of what the Count Saint-Germain looked like back then. He works with esoteric ritual and ceremonial. He presides over the Freemasons and Rosicrucians. In fact, he was probably Christian Rosenkreuz, the fabled personality who began the Rosicrucian tradition. We're talking ritual here, so we're talking ray 7 of ceremonial magic or ritual, the ray of organization. Ritual being the process of a group of individuals who are dedicated to bringing spirit into matter through magical invocation within a consecrated lodge, as we call it, or as the Freemasons call it. Melanie says, I wonder if they came down with full consciousness of who they are and what they have to do, or are they simply doing what they do because they are who they are without? I'm not quite sure of what you mean there, but I think I get the gist. They are fully conscious beings and have been ever since they've taken the 4th initiation, probably. So there's a continuity of consciousness there. They know exactly what they're doing. They are working in conscious cooperation with the planetary plan. So we come back again to the diagram. We deal now with the Masters Moya, Kutumi, and Dwash Kul. This picture is an artist's rendering of a ravine in Tibet, I think it's called. And you can see a lake here, and the Master Moya apparently riding his white horse, and several buildings where the Master Kutumi, Moya and Dwash Kul live in close proximity to each other. So they're in physical incarnate bodies, but they won't necessarily be the bodies that they return in when the hierarchy externalizes them. They may be building even now new bodies in which to inhabit. So they dwell in the Himalayas in a secluded spot called Shigats, far away from the ways of men. The greater number are scattered all over the world. Greater number of masters, I should say, are scattered all over the world, dwelling in different places in various nations, unrecognized and unknown. We have 5 planetary centers: Darjeeling, Tokyo, Geneva, London, and New York City. There is a master who inhabits each of those cities. Unrecognized and unknown, no doubt. They keep a low profile. They don't have to make themselves known yet. They form each in his own place a focal point for the energy of the Lord of the world, and proving to his environment a distributor of the love and wisdom of the deity. So I'm looking at the overall timeline for this class. I'm not going to be able to read everything out to you that I've prepared here, and it would be a little bit boring if I did. But so I'm not going to read out everything about the masters, but I do want to deal with a couple of the most important ones: the Master Moya and the Master Kutumi, and the Master DK, and we can touch upon some of the other ones, but we may not get time to do that. So I'm just something that you may be able to catch up on. So the Master Moya is one of the best known of the Eastern Adepts, who numbers amongst his pupils a large number of Europeans and Americans. He was a Rajput prince at one stage and for many decades held an authoritative position in Indian affairs. He works in close cooperation with the Manu and will himself eventually hold office as the Manu of the Sixth Root Race. He dwells, as does his brother, the Master Kayach, at Shiguts in the Himalayas, and is a well-known figure to the inhabitants of that faraway village. He is a man of tall and commanding presence, dark hair and beard and dark eyes, and might be considered stern were it not for the expression that lies in his eyes. He and his brother, the Master Kayach, work almost as a unit and have done so for many centuries and will into the future. The Master Kayach is in the line for the office of the World Teacher. When the present holder of that office vacates it for higher work and the Sixth Root Race comes into being. The houses in which they both dwell are close together and much of their time is spent in the closest association. As the Master M is upon the first ray, that of will or power, his work largely concerns itself with the carrying out of the plans of the present Manu. He inspires statesmen in the world. He manipulates forces through the Mahachohan. He brings about conditions designed for the furthering of racial evolution. In the physical plane, he influences great national executives who have far vision and the international ideal are influenced by him, and with him cooperates certain of the great devas of the mental plane, and three great groups of angels work with him on mental levels in connection with the lesser devas who vitalize thought forms and thus keep alive the thought forms of the guides of the race to the benefit of the whole of humanity. He has a large body of pupils under his instruction and works in connection with many organizations of an esoteric and occult kind, as well as through politicians and statesmen of the world. So gives you an incredible overview of his responsibilities and the fact that the masters, there's only 63 of them, they must be just flat out keeping up with what's going on in the world and watching over humanity without interfering in our free will. And let me just run through the Master Kutumi here while we're taking a breath. Also very well known, as we said in the previous page, has many pupils everywhere, is of Kashmiri origin, though his family originally came from India. He is also initiate of high degree and is upon the second of the love wisdom ray. He is a man of noble presence and tall, though of rather slighter build than the Master M. He is of fair complexion with golden brown hair and beard and eyes of a wonderful deep blue, through which seem to pour the love and the wisdom of the ages. He has had wide experience in education, having been originally educated at one of the British universities and speaks English fluently. In fact, there is a story about the Master KH and the Master DK who attended a British university back in the 1800s, mid-1800s I think it was. I think in 5 Years of Theosophy, that book, this is discussed. His reading is wide and extensive, and all the current books and literature in various languages find their way to his study in the Himalayas. I wonder if they've got laptops as well these days and on the internet. I wonder. He concerns himself largely with the vitalizing of certain of the great philosophies and interests himself in a number of philanthropic agencies. To him is given the work very largely of stimulating the love manifestation which is latent in the hearts of all men, and of awakening the consciousness of the race, the perception of the great fundamental fact of brotherhood. When we feel, Marty says, when we feel this strong inner calling from specific masters, does that mean that we are inclined to work or focus our life on the rays that they are in charge of? Yes and no. Basically, the masters will use any means they can through their ashrams of contacting people, and of influencing or inspiring them, and so you may be inspired by a worker from one master's ashram that may not be your specific ashram, but may be related to it, but also, of course, your specific ashram. You may not even be anywhere near your own ashram yet. It all depends on where you're at in the whole unfoldment of consciousness. Jeroen says, do these masters transcend our concepts of good and bad, or should they be seen as forces for battling evil forces? Essentially, they put their weight on the side of battling the forces of materialism. Joyce says, have there been any female masters, and if so, when did they start appearing? It's claimed that there has been. I know there's certainly been female initiates, for instance, Alice Bailey, Helena Rurik, Blavatsky were all initiates. Perhaps the Christ, when the Christ returns, may even come back in a female body. That would be certainly politically correct these days, but it may not. We'll see. Maybe he'll come back as a hermaphrodite. But that's certainly the as I discuss in my master's book, the experimenting with the initiation process in female bodies has only been attempted in the last few centuries because of the potency of the will energy that pours through. Can be difficult in a female body, apparently. Female bodies are inherently gravitate towards the second ray of love wisdom, whereas in the even ray line, the 2, 4, 6 line, and male bodies inherently on the first ray of will or power line, 1, 3, 5, 7. I say that very, very generically, so don't take me at my word there. So we have the 7 show hands of the rays here. Moya, ray 1, Kutumi 2, the Venetian master, Serapis, Hilarion, Jesus, and the so-called 7th ray master who took over the post that the master Rakotsi left when he became the Mahachohan. We don't know what that master's name is. The master Jesus lives somewhere in Syria, Hilarion in Crete, Serapis I think in Luxor, Venetian maybe in somewhere in Europe or Italy, so forth. The Manu, the Christ, the Mahachohan in these various locations, which I've already mentioned. And we come to the Master DK, the author, in fact, not only of the Alice Bailey books, but the main person who dictated most of the secret doctrine to Blavatsky, H.P. Blavatsky, known as the Messenger of the Masters. He became a master, in fact, in 1875 when Isis Unveiled was published, the first book that Blavatsky published, and which was also the founding of the Theosophical Society. The secret doctrine came a few years later in 1888. Between 1875 and 1888 was when DK transmitted most of the secret doctrine to Blavatsky. He's in a Tibetan body, very devoted to the Master KH. He was profoundly learned and knows more about the rays than any of the other masters, and also a lot of other esoteric information. He's behind many healing and philanthropic movements in the world, the Red Cross, the United Nations, at least with their founding, maybe not so much now. He was in a very old body at the time. I suspect about in his 80s, so he's probably taken another body by now. There's a lot of conjecture about this in esoteric circles. Excuse me. And from one point of view, it doesn't really matter. It's really about understanding the subjectively his energy. Venetian, the Shohan or custodian of Ray 3. Not much is known about this master. His name is taken from the city of Venice, which is one of the oldest cultural capitals in the world, and he was the artist Paolo Veronese at that time, one of the major painters in the 16th century Venetian school. His task is intimately involved with the development of human culture through the arts, architecture and science. In David Ann Rice's book, The Venetian talks about art, religion, culture, his cooperation with the master Serapis and the training of the artistic mind in the future, helping to make it more responsive to the influence of the higher devas. So again, we have this theme of the masters working with devas. He's the master immediate to the Mahachohan, mentioned at various times in Blavatsky's writings and in biographies about her. Obviously, his position is of extreme importance, not only as a direct link to the Mahachohan, but also as a bridge to all the other rays and ashrams of the masters. So I'm sorry if I'm moving a little bit too quickly here, but this will all be on the video if we get through these pages. Master Serapis, Chauhan of Ray 4, the ray of called Harmony Through Conflict, or the ray of art, music and beauty. The Master Serapis, frequently called the Egyptian, he is the master upon the fourth ray and the great art movements of the world, the evolution of music and that of painting and drama, received from him an energizing impulse. After 2025, this fourth ray will come into expression slowly, and the new music and the new art will start to emerge in the decades ahead. Most of his time and attention to the work of the Diva and Angel or Angelic evolution at the moment, and until their agency helps to make possible the great revelation in the world of music and painting which lies immediately ahead. Before he took up special work, the Master Serapis sought to bring him through some constructive idea for the helping of humanity. He conceived of a world unity in the realm of politics, which would work out as an international banning of the nations for the preservation of international peace. He presented it to the adepts in conclave, and it was felt that something could be done. In other words, he was also behind the founding of the United Nations. Ray 4 is the ray of humanity as a whole. Harmony through conflict. We achieve harmony at successive stages of our evolution through the various conflicts between within ourselves, the dualities within ourselves between matter and spirit and so forth. Serapis means serpent, and in this case a serpent of wisdom, as all masters have become. And this indeed was the name of Pythagoras, as in Python. Pythagoras, of course, being a previous incarnation of the master Kuthumi, a third degree initiate in that lifetime, Pythagoras. The serpent mythology was expressed in the Egyptian uraeus headdress, of course, which has a close connection with the awakened Ajna center. Egypt was, of course, a great civilization of arts and strongly conditioned by Ray 4 plus Ray 3, and, of course, schools of initiation. Ray 5, Master Hilarion, Chauhan of the ray of science or knowledge. An early incarnation was Paul of Tarsus. He is occupying a Cretan body but spends a large part of his time in Egypt, probably working with Master Serapis there. He gave out to the world that occult treatise called Light on the Path by Mabel Collins, and his work is particularly interesting to the general public at this crisis, for he works with those who are developing the intuition and controls and transmutes the great movements that tend to strip the veil from the unseen. His is the energy which, through his disciples, is stimulating the psychical research groups everywhere, and he was who initiated through various pupils the spiritualistic movement, which I'm just going to be discussing again. I've discussed it before, but again in my forthcoming Scorpio newsletter. He has under observation all those who are psychics of a higher order and assist in developing their powers for the good of the group. And in connection with certain of the devas of the astral plane, he works to open up to the seekers after truth that subjective world which leads behind the grossly material. Interesting description here of this master, who allegedly is the Chauhan of the fifth ray. One would expect that he works with scientists in their laboratories and so forth, and he probably does, but that is also the the area of other masters, such as the Master Okotsi, the Master DK, in fact, does work with scientists in laboratories and also with healers. All right, Master Jesus, one of the most well-known, Kohan of Ray 6, the ray of devotion and idealism, the ray that has been cycling out of incarnation since 1625, in fact. And yet, because it has been in incarnation for so long, we're still really feeling the effects of the sixth ray. Most people's astral bodies are on the sixth ray of devotion and idealism. Here's the focal point of energy that flows through the various Christian churches, is at present living in a Syrian body and dwells in a certain part of the Holy Land. He travels much and passes considerable time in various parts of Europe. He might have been on the bus, seated a few seats behind you in a business suit, for all we know. He works especially with masses more than with individuals, though he has gathered around him quite a numerous body of pupils. His pupils are frequently distinguished by that fanaticism and devotion which manifested in earlier Christian times amongst the martyrs. Quite often, sixth ray souls, when they become more evolved, move on to the second ray, which is far calmer than the somewhat volatile sixth ray. He himself is rather a martial figure. Of course, the sixth ray is ruled by Mars and Neptune, a disciplinarian and a man of iron rule and will. He is tall and spare with a rather long, thin face, black hair, pale complexion, and piercing blue eyes, similar to the Master Kutumi, indeed. To him is given the problem of steering the thought of the Occident out of the present state of unrest into the peaceful waters of certitude and knowledge, and of preparing the way in Europe and America for the eventual coming of the world teacher. He is well known in the Bible history, coming before us as Joshua, the son of Nun, appearing again in the time of Ezra as Jeshua, taking the third initiation, as related in the book of Zechariah as Joshua, and in the gospel story he is known for two great sacrifices, that in which he handed over his body for the use of the Christ, and for the great renunciation which is characteristic of the fourth initiation. As Apollonius of Tyana, he took the fifth initiation and became a master of wisdom. That was the life after the Jesus incarnation, in fact, Apollonius of Tyana. And there are books about Apollonius which are amazing in terms of the miracles that Apollonius presided over in that lifetime, should you choose to do any reading on that. I don't know what happened to this picture here, but it's very busy. This is the shine of Ray 7, the ray of ceremonial order or magic, since Master R vacated the position, as I mentioned before. So we don't know who he is, but obviously the energies of the seventh ray, which is coming into incarnation since 1945, are becoming very powerful. And so this master would certainly have his hands full right now with the incoming seventh ray, and would have close contact with Master R, the previous master of the seventh ray ashram, and the Manu on the first ray, in terms of materializing, bringing spirit into matter, the hierarchy's plans. Now, I'm going to have to skip some of this material here because I want to leave time for a bit more discussion and questions. There were two English masters, one that has a definite guidance of the Anglo-Saxon race and is behind the labour movements of the world and democracies, working with capital and labour. One of his disciples is Arnold Toynbee. You can find an article about him on my website that I wrote in the last couple of years, and I think I've mentioned him a couple of times actually, who was a successful disciple of one of the English masters' ashrams. There's also the Master P, who works in North America with mental sciences like New Thought, Christian Science, inhabiting currently an Irish body and has taken over much of Master Serapis's work. These are some of the more well-known masters. There are other ones, obviously, and we could spend a whole year just speculating on this vast subject of the masters. It's up to you if you want to fill in the gaps through your reading and reflection and pondering. But the fact is that they are, as a whole, planning to re-emerge amongst humanity for the first time since the ancient days of Atlantis. And DK, in one of his books, uses the words millions of years. Now, that may be a bit confronting for some of you in terms of timelines, but in my book, Unveiling Genesis, Mysteries of the Root Races and Cycles, I discuss the proper chronology of human history that goes back, way, way back, but in more immediate terms to about 21 million years ago when humans individualized in Lemuria, became conscious beings, through to Atlantis, through to the so-called fifth root race. The Atlantean period about 4 million years ago, which involved Krishna and, of course, the 5 sons of King Pandu and the great story of the Mahabharata, was when the hierarchy had to withdraw due to the dominance of the forces of materialism or darkness at that time. And so right now is the time of their reappearance, their planned reappearance. After all that time, can you imagine? And so the hierarchy's gradual approach to humanity, their precipitation, is in fact creating a lot of the conflict that we're experiencing on this planet today because of their highly refined frequencies clashing with the lower material vibrations in which we all inhabit. This is part, and it's bringing everything to a head where the forces of materialism are making themselves far more well known. They're outing themselves in many ways, especially in the last 2 or 3 years. At this conclave in 2025, certain of the masters who are part of the so-called Council of Shambhala, which includes the Christ, of course, will meet with Sanat Kumara and the so-called Buddhas of activity, no doubt, and do an analysis assessment of where humanity is at, what they can handle, and pick a date for the externalization of the ashrams, which will culminate with the reappearance of Christ. As I've said in various newsletters and other articles, as late as 2080 this could be. A lot of us hope that they might intervene much sooner, given the perilous state of the world at the moment, but they have to really try not to interfere in human affairs and allow our own free will to take precedence and determine our own destiny. They could easily interfere if they wanted to. So we are all being tested and sifted in the great fiery crucible of initiation as we approach 2025. We are being deemed goal fit or not. Many of our co-workers have left us in the last few years, and they'll be preparing for the next phase of the externalization of the hierarchy by incarnating quite soon and being in positions where they can assist with the externalization of the ashrams. So this gives us a broad overview picture of the hierarchy and their plans. And of course, what will occur with the externalization of the hierarchy is the externalization of the mystery schools. The schools of the mysteries will re-externalize again. And in fact, in some of those schools, initiates of ashrams, not masters, but initiates of ashrams will be entrusted to bring people through the first couple of initiations, which has never been done before. So we are all aspiring co-workers with these ashrams, recognizing it as part of the planetary plan and seeing our place that we play within our relative spiritual groups that all of you are probably part of, and how you can further your understanding of these ideas. I've got a few questions here, so I'm going to just pause for a while. Could Rudolf Steiner be a master? It's funny, I've been writing about him today. He might be by now. He was certainly an initiate at the time when he was incarnate, and he, in fact, he broke away from theosophy and created anthroposophy. And of course, he was a psychic medium. I'm not sure. To be quite honest, he might be an advanced initiate. He might have even be a master by now. What ray would he fit? Well, he'd be on the fourth ray. He came forth from a fourth ray country. I think it was Austria. But the nature of his work is got a lot of fourth ray in it, but also fifth ray. I'm not sure. Steiner is being one of the stepping stones for many people, but his work is distinctly different from Blavatsky, and I find that some of his books have distortions in them from the theosophical tradition. Is this why there was a recent battle to control Damascus in relation to Jesus being in Syrian body, literally or metaphorically, modern crusade perhaps? It's an interesting question. I have discussed this in a newsletter, I think for 2015. I did quite an extensive one on Syria. It might have even been 2 parts. And I did mention a quote in there about the Master Jesus living in Syria. In fact, the Christian, what are they called? I can't think of their names now. But yeah, I did speculate about that. Perhaps the conflict there, yes. Perhaps it has to do with his presence. As this, Claudia says, as disciples of the light, are there also counterparts, that is, disciples of the dark, also preparing like we are? Yes, absolutely. We've seen them. They're making themselves known in the last few years. I've been writing about them extensively in all my newsletters. Not mentioning any names now, but it's quite obvious, I think. They are the soldiers, the army of the materialistic forces. Many of them are not what we call evil people. They are materialistically polarized, have well-developed minds, but not so much the awakening of compassion yet. Someone says, love and forgiveness, Jesus' 2 great teachings, the Marys, the Mother Mary, Mary Magdalene, they're making themselves known now, sharing these love wisdom teachings. Indeed, the rebirth of the feminine, in fact, the 3 major amanuenses for the teachings were women, Bailey, Roerich, and Blavatsky. And they are the heralds. They were the heralds of the new Aquarian dispensation coming. So, and of course, a greater appreciation by the patriarchal system that has been in power for so long, and a balancing of the those forces. Atlantis, in fact, at one stage was a matriarchy. So things change over a period of time. Will we go into a matriarchy again? Probably not. It'll be probably a far more balanced gender expression, I think. And at the moment, with Libra strong in the planetary horoscope, humanity is balancing, going from one extreme to the other, balancing those forces.
The masters are at such a high level. What then is the purpose of them incarnating into physical bodies? Because wouldn't that limit them?
It would, and in fact, it's a great question, because they are making a great sacrifice to come back into amongst humanity again. Imagine that you're in next to a cattle corral that's got full of dusts and smells and the sounds of cattle, yeah, and you jump in to that corral with them. That's just kind of an analogy of what it'd be like for the masters to come back. Perhaps it's an exaggeration of sorts, but they, as I said before, they have elected to tread the path of Earth service and work at supervising humanity's evolution. However, when they get to various initiations, or the fifth or sixth initiation, they do keep vacating their posts on a regular basis, these 63 masters. And so other masters who have become masters in the meantime in the various ashrams will step in and take their place. And those more evolved masters will move on and choose another one of the 7 cosmic paths, one of which is the path back to Sirius. But there are other ones as well. So that's the short answer.
Thank you.
Yes, Philip, and I think we have to finish our class because it's 20 past at the time.
Yes, I think there was one more there. Concept of group aura is new to me, but makes so much sense how the hierarchy can support us all. Here we are all creating a group aura. We are indeed. And thanks everyone for turning up. Great turnout again. Not everyone could come because we have just as many other participants who can't make this time zone and who will catch up on video. So yes, we all move and learn together, including myself. I don't claim to know everything. So look forward to seeing you all next week for the class on Shambhala.